Good evening. This is the start, along with the video that came out earlier, of the proper rebooting of me on YouTube. Or me actually just like getting up and putting stuff on the internet because it's fun and interesting. You join me at home in my bedroom, still light outside, probably nearing 8 o'clock. And I wanted to film this later, but I felt like now was the right time. As you probably can tell from the title of this video, I'm going to be telling two ghost stories that happened to me, really happened to me, at two separate points in my life. To just give some background, my family isn't really religious, not very much. My mother was raised in a religious household, but she has more of like a spiritual opinion on that kind of stuff, and my dad isn't religious at all. My sister's confirmed though, so she's I suppose a good Christian. And I don't know where I really stand on it. I believe that there is like spiritual presence in the world, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here telling you two real ghost stories in that sense. But the two of them happened at two separate points in my life, two quite different points in my life. The first happened when I was living in Lancashire before I moved back down south permanently, and that's the one that probably sticks in my mind because I was only a little kid there. I was probably, if we're going to say that's like, I don't know, 2012 I think, and then the second one happened much later. The second one happened in the spring of 2019. But talking about them I think is interesting because as someone who doesn't have a really strong connection to spiritualism or faith or any kind of organised religion, I find it quite hard to justify what I saw or what they were. And it's funny because I'm going off topic already because I'm starting to think I should have lit another candle, if not more candles, for the purpose of telling these stories, because it just looks like I lit a candle as an afterthought, but I remembered it's the only candle I have up here. I should probably get some more. They're probably good. They probably fill the room with nice smells. I do leave the window open quite often, and I leave it open like today when it's raining, because I love the smell of rain. That's a personal me thing. Anyway, I digress. On with the stories. So like I said, the first story comes from in 2012. At that time we were living in Lancashire, and we were living in this, the first couple of years we'd been there, my mum's job had provided us a place to live, whilst this barn that we ended up being converted into a house was being done, because it was this building that the school had and they didn't know what to do with, so they said, well, we can do it up into accommodation for a senior member of staff. And we moved into that house, and it was a really interesting place because we had lived in quite a small house beforehand, and because it was a converted barn, it was big, and I was little, so I had lots of running around and places to go, and things to see, in the garden was quite big. But the point is that it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, and there was sort of a house 10 minutes in that direction, and then another 10 minutes in that direction. So you start to get a sense of how sort of isolated you were. And when I was a kid, I was very, very interested in horror films, and I love horror films now, but I especially love sort of paranormal films, but the one thing I hated was sort of films of home invasions and stuff. So I was very, very scared of people breaking into our house and hurting me, hurting my family. And it was something that was a big fear of mine. I think it's a big fear of a lot of people. The more people I talk to, the more I learn about that. But I remember the room that my room in that house was reasonably small, but it had a very, very big window, and it had a big window that covered one wall because it was like barn doors, and the curtains that we had were too small, and so they didn't, well, they were too short, I mean, so they didn't cover the entire window, and there was this little kind of like slit, this little crack in between the curtains where you could see out into one of the fields, and as luck would have it, my bed was directly facing that crack, and it wasn't something that bothered me. It was just something that, based on the furniture that was in the room, was convenient. And when you're, that young, you don't really have an opinion on where your furniture goes. You just kind of, or if any furniture goes there, you just kind of go along with it. And one night, so this is where the story comes in. One night, I think that I'd stayed up a bit later than I normally would have back then, and I went up to bed, as I probably did, probably too late, and I do all my good night stuff with my parents, and then I get into bed, and I used to be really, really frightened of the dark, and I used to get really bad experiences when I was in the dark on my own. So I had a little light on my bedside table, and so weird. And during the course of that night, I woke up. As I tended to do that. I would wake up and I'd probably go, if I was scared, I'd go see my parents, but that happened less. But I was scared of the dark, so I didn't like getting out of bed and going down the corridor because it was dark down there. I was probably the only person in the house that left the light on. And I'll never forget waking up in the middle of the night and sort of, wipe my eyes, I'm tired, and I look in front of me to where that crack is in the window, and because my light's on, I can see the reflection in that window. And I didn't explain it earlier, but there was, behind my bed, there was a little sort of space, probably just big enough for a person to stand there, and we used it for storage when we first moved in, just because we had some boxes and stuff that we couldn't fit anywhere else because we moved with, we had more stuff than we thought, but those have been taken out and we just never moved the bed back. And so this space behind the bed, like I said, it was probably enough room that a human could definitely stand there. And I remember looking into the crack between the curtains, because they didn't cover the whole way, and I saw something standing in the space behind my bed, and I froze because I didn't know what it was. How could I have known? And I didn't turn around, which is the important thing. I didn't turn around because I was fucking petrified at this point. I was just staring at this reflection of this thing behind me, and I just got chills thinking about it. But it had no human features. It was like man-shaped, broad shoulders, really tall, but like the face was blank. And I could see it sort of moving or swaying side to side. It's something like that. And I did not move one bit. All I can remember was seeing it reflected in my window, and the temptation was there to turn around, but I didn't turn around because I didn't want to confirm whether it was real, because if I confirmed it was real, but all I know is I wasn't asleep. I am not one of those people that has a very good recollection of what they, dreamed at some point in the past. And I have quite a good memory, and when I was a kid, I had a very good memory as well. And I can remember waking up and seeing that thing, and it's sort of like swaying side to side, not like it was dancing, but in the sense that it was just sort of moving. It couldn't be confused with something that wasn't living. It was very much alive, and it very much existed. And it got worse through the night, and I drifted between states of consciousness and unconsciousness. But the one constant was that whenever I woke up and I saw that gap in my curtains, I could see that thing standing there. And at one point when it got really bad, I'm not sure what time it was, I can't remember the time, but I remember the feeling. I could hear it breathing, and my door was shut, so no one could have come in, but this thing is breathing down my neck. And I still remember the feeling of the sort of the hairs going up on the back of my neck, from the sort of cold breath that this thing was sort of was blowing onto me. And I think I was sitting there and shaking or something, and after that, my memory of it gets a little bit hazy, and I think I started to properly fall asleep. But it's the same thing again. I'd wake up, my eyes would open, and I could see it in the little reflection. Again, I tried to pretend it wasn't there. And at some point in the night, I think I heard somebody using the bathroom down the hall, and I just started like crying and weeping and like yelling and calling for someone to come in. And I think my mum came in, and she asked me what was going on, and I said there was a man behind my bed. And so she did the whole thing where you look under the bed, you look at it. She said it wasn't there, but she was holding me. I could still see it in the reflection, and it was moving, and I had no idea what to do, and I was just petrified. And I couldn't think of what to do. And I know it wasn't a dream, because there was never that moment where you kind of snap out of it and you wake up from the dream. I didn't wake up from it. It just sort of happened. And this thing, whatever it was, sort of walked around my bed, and after it vanished from the reflection, it vanished entirely. But I could still sort of hear like breathing or the movement of breath. There was something in the air, and the room was cold. And that was one thing my mum did notice, is that it was winter, so we had the radiators on, and she remembers, when I asked her about this, she remembers that room was really cold, even though she put the heating on in there before I went to bed. So there's that very strange detail. But it didn't happen again. It didn't happen again. That didn't happen. And people didn't believe me. I began to believe me. I said there was a man in my room. No one would believe you. They think it's a nightmare. They think you're just kidding. But I remember it. I remember it clear as day. And I still think that was the first thing paranormal I ever encountered. And it really fucked with me. It was weird. The thing never like hurt me or harmed me or tried to touch me, but it was menacing. And it had a threatening aura about it, and I didn't like it, and it bothered me deeply. But I think as far as me being like a little kid, that's the only one I can remember. The second one that I mentioned earlier when I started the video was happened a little bit later in life. It was spring 2019, so I was probably 13. Yeah, I was 13. I was definitely 13. And my family originally from up north. My mum's from Lancashire, my dad's from Yorkshire. So we go there and we go to the Lake District quite often. I think this was in the Lake District because we were staying in Keswick, which is this sort of big major town in the Lake District. Apart from somewhere like Carlisle, which is the big city I say big city in the lakes. Keswick is the main sort of touristy bit, but we were staying around there, so we had like a cottage. Rented like a cottage or something for the week. I don't remember the details. And we went walking quite a lot. My family does a lot of walking, hiking, fells and the fells and shit like that. And we did a lot more when pre-COVID, when me and my sister were younger, and my parents were also younger, and we went on this one walk, and the weather was bad. And I never liked walking in bad weather conditions. I was never a fan of doing that, and so I was already a bit cagey on it. But put coats on, put your waterproof trousers on, and kind of just get on with it. So I remember the walk started off fine. It was an ordinary walk. There was a bit of up and down when it was a bit of a fell. I think we edged the side of it. And we came down into this valley, and it was sort of foggy. And we were once again, when you came out of this valley, there was this path that took you along the edge of the fell. You could see that forest below, and there was a lake just past the forest. And I think that was the goal, so we were going to have a bite to eat there. But the weather was getting worse. And I will never forget, as we were coming down that path along the edge, there was a tree, and this tree was sort of one of these really barren, wintry ones that you see a lot up in the mountains because they don't get sufficient weather conditions to regrow these. Basically, they're just dead trees, and they jut out from the side of these fells, and they're really dramatic and cool. And I have a framed photo of one somewhere in here. I've got a lot of pictures on the walls. And I looked up past this sort of jut out tree, and I could see someone just kind of standing on the hillside. I didn't think anything of it at first because it's a popular walking spot. People were walking, and I think after a couple of minutes, the penny kind of dropped that something was weird. And I get when I feel like something is wrong, I go into sort of fight or flight very, very quickly. Or at least I go into that feeling, when you know that something is wrong and you shouldn't be somewhere. And it sort of dawned on me that apart from this person up on the hillside, we had seen nobody else on this walk for the entirety of the journey, which was weird because it was like April, weather conditions weren't amazing, but people were still up and walking the day before. Excuse me. And I started to wonder what that person was doing, and it was sort of when I looked back at them as we were walking away that I noticed that they were getting closer, and they were walking closer, and that put me on edge a little bit. But we follow this path down, and I get distracted, and I'm talking to my family, and we're going into the forest, and there isn't a clearly marked track, so my dad's like, stay behind me, I know the route, I'm going to walk us through, but we're going slowly, basically. And I look behind me, and the person on the side of the hill is still following. And I know people will probably ask me, oh, how do you know they're following you? Well, they were still on that side of the hill until my family and I went past. And then this person comes down and begins walking behind us. And I know they were following because I never had like a direct look at them. They were always behind something, like they were behind a tree or they were behind a fallen object or something. And it really fucked with me. And I kept trying to tell my dad that somebody's following us. And he didn't believe me. And he thought they were just walking on the same path. And as we went deeper into the forest, I began to hear like running on all sides of me. Like, there's one rule, and I think most people know this, but there's a rule in when you go anywhere sort of in nature that has sort of a large wildlife population, especially in forests, this is anywhere in the world, that if you can hear animals and life and stuff going on, that's a good sign, because you know the wildlife isn't afraid of anything. But if the forest is completely silent, no wildlife noises at all, no noise from anything, then you should probably leave. That's what I was always told, that's what I always read. And for the first time that I had ever been walking in a forest or anywhere, it was completely silent. Dead. Pitch black. And that was something that all four of us started to notice, because it was very, very unusual, and it wasn't happening earlier. Even when we were walking through, it wasn't because we were there. There was a tourist route. Loads of people went through there every day. The wildlife went hiding, but they were hiding in that situation. And then I started to hear running on either side of us. And whatever had been following us, I couldn't see it there anymore. And there was a really thick fog, and I could hear running, and my family just thought it was sort of sounds from the forest, but I knew that there was something weird or different about those sounds. The sounds didn't sound like wildlife. They sounded like something more human, or something travelling on two legs. And that was what really bothered me. We ended up coming out of the woods and to the lake's edge, and we sat there for a minute, but the kind of vibe that was in the air was that we didn't really want to hang around. And so we went down, and we went back to the cottage, and I couldn't sleep that night. I was terrified. I think most people don't realise that if you're not the kind of person that believes in that sort of stuff, and you see something like that, or you hear something that is sort of unexplainable, at least in normal logic, then it really does change the way you think. And I've not had any other paranormal experiences. Actually, that might be a lie. In my first year of university, when I was living in the big founders building at RH, that building is apparently haunted. I don't know the legitimacy of that, but, well, you know, I decided that I was going to do some light exploring one night. I couldn't sleep. It was probably October time or something, maybe even November. It was definitely in the winter time. All this shit happens in the winter, that's what I'm saying. There are no ghosts in the summertime. So I got out of bed, I got dressed, and put my headphones on, and started walking. And I was walking around the building, around the floors, and I got to the portrait gallery, which are gold portraits of the founders of notable people to the union. It's like, paintings from the Victorian era. And it was pitch black down there, nobody was there. The only lights that were on were the ones that sort of along the wall. There was no activity, nothing from the offices or anything. Nobody was there because it was like 12 midnight, maybe it was 1 a.m. And I had this very acute moment, and I remember it really well, where I remember being watched, and I knew that something was watching me because I had that same feeling that I had when I was in the Lake District and I was followed, where I could feel like eyes boring into the back of my head, but I couldn't find where they were. And that's a very frightening thing, because when you feel like you're being watched in a public place, it's probably because you are, and it's probably because somebody is looking at you, and you just have the human brain has an uncanny way of realizing that something is happening to you. And usually once you pinpoint who's looking at you, whether that's a friend or someone else or someone trying to catch your eye, that feeling of anxiety goes away, because you're now acutely aware of who's looking at you. There's nothing to worry about. It's either someone you know or someone you don't. That feeling of knowing you're being watched, but number one, not knowing who it is, and even worse, not knowing where, is worse. And I felt like it was coming from the portraits. And there was a point where I heard a door slam and I saw like a dark corridor, and I felt that feeling of being watched get even worse. Like when a cat gets scared and its back arches and it sort of hisses. I felt like that, and so I kind of just booked it in the opposite direction and ran into this dark corridor. The lights came on then because they were automatic, but I felt really weird going to bed, and again I couldn't sleep that night because I'd either freaked myself out or something had freaked me out. A combination of both maybe, but once again it wasn't a feeling that I could describe. It really unsettled me. But yeah, nothing else has happened since. But this is the kind of shit that will happen tonight. I will suddenly start fucking seeing things because I've just sat here and divulged 3 different ghost stories that I've experienced to you. So maybe that will happen. Maybe I'll have to make another update. Fuck that noise. Yeah, those are the only ones. I suppose bottom line is if you think you experience something paranormal, you should probably think about it more, and you should probably try and find an explanation, because it's never good. So I'm freaking myself out now. To not know what you're experiencing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my ghost stories, and if I have any more, or think of any more, remember any more, I will return to the spot with the single candle and the picture of my grandfather and the vinyl and the light and the curtain and the chair, and I'll tell some more. Thank you for watching. Good night.